Hello everybody, welcome if you're new, welcome back if you're old. Today I would like to talk to you about gender bending in theater. This here comes up because last night I watched an incredible, oh my god, it was a masterpiece. You know when you see a play and you're like, wow, this is really good, and other times when you see a play and you're like, wow, this is great, or wow, this was so fun, or something like along those lines, or wow, those people are so talented, and then sometimes you see a play and you're like, wow, this is art. I love all of those, by the way, and I will gladly take any of those, but I love the experience of being able to watch something and being like, wow, this is art. This is actually so good. This is so interesting. From the writing to the directing to the acting to the costuming to like the lighting, the set. And you're like, this feels like art, you know? It's just so fun when you get to see a play and you're like, this feels like artistry, you know? It's not like hard to understand or like really abstract, or sometimes it's not even particularly deep, but you're like, wow, this is art. And sometimes you're like, wow, my friend who's in the show, part of their costume is wearing mismatched socks despite the fact that they're wearing boots and long pants, and that those mismatched socks are part of the costume, and that is artistry. I saw a production of B last night. B is a play by the Chilean playwright Guillermo Calderon. I don't know if I actually pronounced that correctly. I don't speak Spanish, but yeah, that's the playwright's name, and the name of the play is B, just the letter. It's a play about revolutionary violence, and it's about these two women who are planting a bomb, and this guy who makes the bomb for them, and a nosy neighbor. If you want to, you can read it. Maybe I don't actually know how to get access to it, but it's really fun. It was very funny in like a bad way, and really horrifying in a good way, and it was so good. I knew pretty much everybody who was involved in it. I didn't know the assistant director. I didn't know like maybe one other person in the crew, and I think that's it. I knew three of the four cast members. One of them is a good friend of mine. It was great. I know it's been a bit of a tangent, but this is where the gender bending comes in, because the director for this piece decided to gender bend Marcella into Marcello. And that's obviously completely acceptable, especially when it's so easy to gender bend like Latin American names. Like let's say Julia, Julio. Okay, well that is in Portuguese, for the record. But still, it's pretty easy to do that. So no problems. So instead of Alejandra and Marcela, we have Alejandra and Marcelo. It was pretty obvious who he gender bent almost immediately, because the first thing that Marcela does is say like, oh yeah, my boyfriend's dead. And that's like fine, you know, and that does still give like a little bit of that, I don't exactly know how to explain it, like the like minority energy, the energy of like wanting to like have rights, I guess, or like all these things that are like boiling up, because it doesn't really matter what the gender of these characters are. And I thought that that was like a really cool move. It didn't like impact the play very much. It just kind of like changed the gender and sexuality of a character, like big whoop. And like some of the lines, obviously, because instead of like she, herring, you, he, him, I think that that worked very well, and I don't have any complaints about it. But I was thinking about how sometimes it is not ideal to gender bend a character, and sometimes it doesn't work. And then I was also thinking about how, like, in certain plays, you don't gender bend the character, but you gender bend the actor. Theater, I think, gives people the ability to express them however they want to. So I think refusing to gender bend people or characters is both odd and also completely acceptable. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. Recently, I was the assistant stage manager in a production of Anything Goes, where the captain and the purser were both played by female presenting people, and the costuming also was like a female captain and purser outfit from the 30s. We didn't change any of the lines. They were still referred to by sir, and I think they're very rarely gendered, but in the terms that they were gendered, in the play we didn't actually change the pronouns for some reason. I don't know why, but still referred to as sir, still he himmed, right? He him women, I guess. It was very interesting because when we referred to specific, I don't know if we did this when we referred to the purser, but when we referred to the captain, we tended to use she her pronouns for the captain, despite that not actually happening in the show. I thought that that was a very strange way to do it because you're both gender bending and not gender bending at the same time, and the characters are both playing women but also men at the same time. When I did a production of Much Ado About Nothing quite a while ago, I was cast as Leonardo and George Seacole, but nobody actually cares if I was cast as George Seacole. However, the play that my friend who was directing this was cutting from, like the version, they'd already gender bent Leonardo, and he was like, oh, that would be fun to like gender bend Leonardo and say this is Leonardo instead. So I played Leonardo, and it was fine. Like, I don't think that my experience was greatly changed other than the fact that instead of saying, her mother hath many times told me so, in response to, oh, is this your daughter? I had to say, her doctor has many times told me so. Which is definitely a switch from like, oh, haha, yeah, my wife is sure that she didn't cheat on me, versus, yeah, the doctor's pretty sure she wasn't switched at birth. And they're both funny jokes. I don't know. It's fine either way. It was a little bit weird that she was like hanging out with the boys, but you know, maybe Leonata, that's just what she needs, you know? Once again, it's kind of one of those things where it's like, oh, this is like a Latin-based name, it's very easy to gender bend, and it didn't like make that much of a difference, although, I mean, it did change. This one person who wrote poetry about the motherless daughters in Shakespeare. I am obsessed with that poem so much. Oh my god. Anyway, I'm getting very off track here, but I'm excited. I'm excited. Also, in my life, I've played a lot of male characters, which is like more acceptable in certain realms of theater than others. For example, one of my directors, he would probably rather die than have me play a man, like one of the directors that I've had in the past. And that's like most of the times that I've played women were when I was being directed by him, because he was like, you are a woman. And I was like, sure, I guess. That's where I've gotten most of my experience playing women, but for most of my life I've played men because I've mostly done Shakespeare my whole life. And I've never actually really minded playing men. I think it's fun. I mean, I don't care. Also, because I was doing Shakespeare, it was like way easier when I was costuming myself, especially because it was like I just gotta like use the same sweatpants for my pumpkin pants and like an oversized shirt, and like I've got it down. And for like more modern versions, put a picture of me and Macbeth up here. I could just kind of like wear whatever I wanted. Although in that version of Macbeth, I played 11 characters, so there were women. There were women. It's very interesting how different directors sometimes feel about changing the gender of their character or changing the gender of like who the actor is to play the character. That's not, they don't do that. They don't do that. But, you know, it's like, okay, you have a woman playing a man or a man playing a woman. You usually have women playing men, which I think is a fascinating phenomenon because people think it's more acceptable to request someone who is not masculine to express masculinity rather than somebody who's not feminine to express femininity. And that is fascinating. And I'm sure that my friend who majors in gender, women, sexuality studies could probably tell you a little bit more. And I don't know, maybe I should bring that up to her. Maybe she might be interested. So there's a lot of just like stuff in like theater in terms of gender politics. And I don't even know if I'd consider it politics. I mean, what I brought up you could definitely argue is like political, but it is very interesting, especially considering that there are places where for periods of time women weren't allowed to act in the theater, or they weren't allowed to join certain theater companies, such as like in Shakespeare's theater company, like women weren't allowed to join. All the female parts were played by like prepubescent or like early teenage boys. which is like a whole other thing to unpack, to be completely honest here. But on the bright side, there aren't a lot of kisses in Shakespeare, and that's probably why. Speaking of Shakespeare and gender and who plays what, first of all, other than the fact that it's interesting that nowadays way more women are playing men in Shakespeare, and that was not how it was beforehand, I wanted to talk about how one of my friends when I was in Cymbeline, she played Caius Lucius, and she was like, I want to play Caius Lucius as a woman. And we were all like, sure. And she was like, okay, so we're gonna like change some of the lines, and obviously we can do that because Shakespeare's in the public domain, no problem. So the director's like, okay, just like she, her, and then I think it was like madam instead of sir or something. I don't actually, sir? Is Caius Lucius referred to as sir? I don't know. We changed some of the lines so that that was more clear, and we were just like, we're not going to misgender you. In contrast, I was playing Pisanio, and I was like, I think Pisanio is a man, so like, I don't want to change that about him. And so we had the most gender non-conforming Pisanio ever. Oh my god, it was so fun. I loved my costume. I wore like 3-inch like platform heels and like suits. It was so fun. I don't know why I was costumed like that, but I was having a great time. I was so tall. The B gender bending wasn't bad. It worked very well for the goal of the story and the purposes of the story. But I guess part of me wonders how sometimes you can gender bend and it doesn't feel bad. Like, I don't know, the captain and the purser in Anything Goes, or Caius Lucius in Cymbeline, or Leonato in Much Ado About Nothing, or I guess Marcella in B. But then when you're doing more modern pieces, people tend to like to cast actors as the gender that they're playing. And that makes sense, especially for musicals, and it's like, okay, we need somebody with this, like, vocal range if you can't, for some reason, change the vocal range or you don't want to, but it does obviously, like, change things and make things, like, I guess more complex, and you have to start thinking about, like, what does it mean to gender bend this character, right? Like, for example, let's say you gender bend JD and Heathers for some reason. I know a lot of people do that, or like a lot of like women play JD, but women playing JD and having JD as a woman are two very different things, and it very much changes the vibe of the show. A teenage boy losing his mother versus a teenage girl losing her mother has a very different connotation to it and a very different affect, you know? And it feels different. Even if it's not, and it's like, yeah, destroy the gender binary and stuff, but it's not going to change the fact that those implications still exist in the world, and pretending that they don't isn't actually going to get you anywhere. Like, you have to actually fight to resolve that, as opposed to ignore it, because if you ignore something, it's still going to be there. And if you need help with that, please read The Rhinoceros. That is a play about people slowly transforming into rhinoceroses because they're ignoring the fact that people are transforming into rhinoceroses. And they're like, it's fine. Maybe they have the right idea. I'll go become a destructive rhinoceros too. The destructive rhinoceroses are actually symbolic of fascism. Fun fact. It's crazy the way that the most political I've gotten in a video so far has been one where I'm talking about theater. Which I guess that makes sense. Theater is art, art is political. You can say that it's not. However, a lot of art is political, and theater is very much in that realm. Theater is medicine for me, and it's medicine for a lot of other people in the world. Anyway, having presentation of people changes the way that we see the world, right? For example, I was in a production called Metamorphosis, and it was based off of Ovid's Metamorphosis, but it was like a modernized telling of the stories. It was just like a bunch of monologues, pretty much. The person who did the Medea monologue was a man. He sat there with his purse and like his lipstick and like his glasses, like his sunglasses. They were very fancy. Obviously, I knew why we did that, and it was cool, and he was like fantastic. But audience perception of that was probably different than audience perception of literally everything else, where everyone's like gender seemed to match with their character's gender, or like who they were speaking as gender, right? I was on the internet the other day, and by the internet I mean Tumblr, and I was going through this like challenge thing. And it was like, you know, promoting sapphic ships and sapphic fan fiction, because there is not a lot of that. And this blog that's promoting this got an ask and was like, hey, if we gender bend these characters, is that okay? And they said, well, if you decide that these two canonical men are actually like trans women, go for it. If you're literally just gender bending them for the sake of joining the challenge, that's not actually doing the challenge, because that's not what it's about. It's we're trying to focus on like women. I just think that that's really interesting, especially like in the context of theater, and is it, and like what's acceptable, and I all of my thoughts are unformed, and they're just existing in my head and like this big goopy puddle that's like turning into this very long video. I've been recording for like almost 30 minutes. Anyway, the bee I saw was a masterpiece, and it was beautiful. And I think that when people gender bend characters, they need to think about the implications of all the lines that they say, and how that will reflect not only in the character but in the audience and in the actor, and if they're capable of that. Because sometimes gender bending a character means you end up with like very feminine men or very masculine women, because the way that people write men and women is often very different. It's not always very different, but it is often very different. For the most part in theater, I think that gender bending is understandable and okay, whether you bend the character's gender to more accurately fit the actors, or if you say, no, you, a man, are now playing a woman as a woman. You got that? Mm-hmm. Great. So I think that those are both like fine options. There's so much that can be said and that can be done, and that like impacts the way that you see performance and you see these characters. And I'm sure that I would have had a completely different experience watching Marcella's character as opposed to Marcello's character in B. And I just it is genuinely such a fascinating phenomenon, and I don't know, I might talk about it later if and when I will inevitably have more thoughts about theater and gender. But for now, I just wanted to talk briefly about gender bending in theater and the ways it can be done, and the fact that sometimes, and many times, and most times, it is done well and done right, but other times, I think that it can be curious to see how it can be done wrong, especially if a character's gender is particularly important to them. Like, for example, you probably wouldn't do Mrs. Warren's profession and gender bend it into Mr. Warren's profession, because then that changes the entire context of the entire show. Anyway, those are my thoughts. I think that I'll have more later, but I've been talking for a while now, and I feel like I'm talking in circles, and that's usually my cue to stop talking. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have an incredible day. Bye for now.